Yeah, so in terms of how these sort of concepts relate to sort of sports vision, sort of in competitive professional sports, the key factor also involved with our task is that, and this is a little counterintuitive because most people don't realize it, but in terms of the 220 degrees field of view that we have with our full peripheral vision, there's only the central 3 to 5 degrees at the maximum where we actually get highly detailed vision. The rest of it, as you further you go out, it becomes much more blurred. So you can think of it as all sort of low resolution with a sort of high resolution spotlight. And because of this, and again, this is counterintuitive because it's mostly unconscious to our perception, to actually understand our visual environment, our eyes dart around using what are known as saccades, whereas we rapidly switch targets from one point to get high detailed information, a little bit like a spotlight, and then it moves very, very quickly to another point and to another point until we get the most pertinent points of information in the scene, and our brain takes those, a little bit like a piece of a jigsaw, and starts to build a picture of the whole environment that we consciously perceive before we even built it. And it's very, very efficient and extrapolated. But a key thing here is that when the eyes move rapidly from one point to another, you can imagine that it's almost like moving the whole world around very rapidly. Everything becomes blurred and the brain just literally cannot process information. So the visual cortex actually shuts down and you become temporarily blind, but only briefly for a moment. You can actually test this by looking from the far left to the far right, and you'll notice a brief sort of blank flash where your vision turns off. So in this situation, you need to sort of understand your environment. You need to spotlight all these key points of information, but at the same time, the more your eyes move around, the less you're actually seeing. And in some studies, for people who are in very, very busy environments, then up to 15% of the day, they can be functionally blind with their eyes open. So there's a trade-off between these two. And in this concept, we need to, when we look at the studies, the research on professional athletes, we see that actually when it comes to situational awareness, sort of the best athletes in the world, and there's a lot of research by Matt Williams in this space, a large body of evidence, show they have a particular visual search strategy. They use their knowledge and experience to decide what are the most important points to look at. For example, if a soccer player is trying to tackle another soccer player, an elite player will look around their hips and then spread their attention to get the rest of the information, or amateur players will tend to look at the ball and look at the feet, and they're easily deceived. The other factor that we found in the research in terms of this trade-off with how much to look around and how much to sort of process is what's known more in the US as the quiet eye technique, is that world-class athletes tend to look at less points of information and they tend to fixate on them longer. So they get more detailed information about only the most important things, and the brain does the work building up the rest of the scene. And another reason why this is important is the peripheral vision side. So again, I mentioned before, peripheral vision is really taxing on the brain. You basically, you're processing your whole peripheral field if you're trying to without the detail, then you can actually process still important things like the motion. You can still process multiple object trackings. You can process what we call optic flow, which is what is the stimulation in your environment on the retina to judge how fast you are moving or how fast other people are moving around you. So it's still a very powerful system without the detail. So when you fixate on a point for longer, you can get the detailed information about that point, but then you can also push your mental attention onto the peripheral field of view. And that's what elite athletes are very, very good at doing. So if they focus on one point, they're always paying attention to other points. So you imagine it's like a soccer game, you might be looking to where they're tracking the ball, focusing on the ball, but you might actually be tracking 3 or 4 teammates and opposing players. And with this sort of search strategy, the interesting thing is there's a huge difference between elites and amateur athletes, but actually this is just a technique that's very trainable. You know, there are tools in the market using visual pivots where you anchor your vision on a certain point and you pay attention to other areas, and Neurotracker is one of them. But it's a technique that's quite trainable and critical to sports performance. But a little bit more into the neuroscience side now and the sports vision side. When we do this type of task, tracking tasks using peripheral vision stimulation, we see that across all populations, but particularly athletes, everybody learns very rapidly this task. So we see a high proficiency for learning. So this data on the left There's a study published in Nature Scientific Reports. It was featured on the Nature homepage, actually. It actually showed the difference between rugby players, hockey players, and soccer players in some of the world's best teams, over 100 athletes, how they perform against NCAA athletes in the US, who are still elite, but they're not professional, and how they compare to university students who don't play sports. And as this is an abstract task, it's not specific, or, it doesn't sort of train any specific skills or detection environment. We're looking at sort of more raw mechanics of the brain. We know that the task is also very simple, and there's no negligible sort of technique or practice-related effects or strategy. So when you do this task, it takes 60 seconds to learn how to do it. You keep your gaze in the center, spread your attention, and then there's nothing anybody can tell you to help you to do the task better. So when you improve at this task, we know it's a little bit like if you go from bench pressing 50 kilos to 100 kilos. If you make that sort of improvement, we know your muscle mass or muscle efficiency is improved. And it's very similar in terms of the window into the brain for this. So in this study, it was interesting. It showed that there was a very clear correlation between not only initial baseline, initial measurement of this task with elite sports performance. And there was another study done that did one single 6-minute session with an MBA team, tracked them across the season. It was effective at predicting how they would perform in the season. It showed differences in the player positions. But more importantly, we see that even though the world-class athletes started off at a high level, they accelerated in their learning. So this gives us a functional window into their brains to say that they, for whatever reasons, it could be epigenetics, genetics, it could be environmental stimulation of being an athlete for a long time, but their brains seem to be hyperplastic. They learn they start off at a very high level, and they learn extremely quickly. And as far as I'm aware, this seems to be the biggest single differentiating measure between elite athletes and non-elite athletes is their brain plasticity, their ability to adapt to new tasks and new demands. But with this learning trajectory, it also gets in because we get a function of their ability to learn potentially all sorts of other tasks, so we get in a picture of that ability. Yeah.
Mr. Lee, sorry to interrupt you, but you have just said that the athletes with the genetic qualities, those who have the genetics, type of genetics, they learn more quickly than the others. And you also have used the
we
term
don't know.
hyper.
It could be genetics. It could be genetics. They're often a factor, but it could well be environmental stimulation. We've actually seen a study that actually looked at collegiate athletes in Australia. They just baseline on Neurotracker, did no training, baseline again at the end of the soccer season to see what was the impact of doing all that training competition across a year, what was the impact on their brains. It was quite significant. So just the act of doing sports may be enhancing brain plasticity and other functions. There's lots of evidence to support that. Or it could be epigenetic.
Yeah, maybe an achievement motivation could be the the associated factor with those athletes who learn quickly or achieve things quickly. That could
There's
be,
many
in my
potential factors. Yeah, it could be psychological based. Yeah, so we don't exactly know, but what we do know is that brains are extremely efficient at learning a new complex task, like Neurotracker in this case. Yeah.
But when we talk about neuroplasticity or the hyperplasticity, don't you think there is a chance that I may have high need for achievement, but my genetics is not supporting me. So if while trying to master some sort of not task, I'll say task is not the case here. It is the parameter of the specific task, and you need a kind of performance indicator where you are focusing, in order to make an improvement in your overall performance. So my need for achievement or motivation is really high, but my genetics is not supportive. Don't you do you think that could be the case with the few athletes? And then there are athletes those who are they are not really putting as much as effort of like other athletes, just some effort, and but the genetics or genetic material you know kind of supporting them, so and that is why they're learning much quicker than the other one.
There could be myriads of factors that contribute to who are very successful performers and who are not. In this case, though, it's more the other way around. We're actually using a tool that's testing something very specific. It's a complex task. It's very specific. It's very objective. We have very precise measures. And this task is telling us that this group of people is very different from this group of people, who are very different from this group of people. And the really big difference is that being an elite world-class athlete, they have their brain functions at this complex task are far superior than other populations. Yeah, we see high performance in esports and some evidence in traders in the business world performing high, but it seems to be effective at detecting those differences. So you think of it as a window into the brain, if you like, that you don't normally get to see. It's
Could
very
be
different.
this could Yeah, this could be one of the future research recommendation for the people who are working in sport genetics. We can try to find a kind of relationship between if there is a relationship between those who are high achiever or high learner and
Yeah.
their genetics is supporting on the same time or not. That could be a nice topic of PhD.
Fascinating area, yeah, and a young area in neuroscience. So yeah, ideally you'd want to do a study like this, get this learning rate measure. So young athletes, are just sort of, starting to maybe semi-pro, 14 to 16 years old, see if they have a high, high learning rate, particularly high learning rate this task, does it predict that they will then become successful athletes? That would be the sort of follow-up study to this type of research. Yeah. But essentially, all this is looking at the power of the cognitive assessment tool from the assessment perspective. Is it telling you something useful and interesting? For example, there's lots of other studies in sports science. So if you want to look at sort of in English soccer, there's studies to show that if you take the first, the Premier League, and you take, football players from much lower leagues who are far inferior, and you try to measure the difference in sprint time, how fast they can run and accelerate, barely any difference. Lots of the research to show that in some very similar findings, if you measure reaction time, doesn't really give you anything. Here we have something that gives you a huge difference. Says this is strikingly different. So this tells us that we've got a tool that's given us measures that's telling us something really different, really special about these types of elite athlete brains compared to other people. Yeah.
That sounds really interesting. It seems so fascinating actually learning about all these technologies and how they can really manifest into the performance is
yeah, you think most of the
beyond.
interest, you think most interest would be power transfer, how does it improve real world performance? And that is fascinating. There's some really good evidence there, but actually it's still surprisingly fascinating just using it from assessment perspective. For example, it's a very large study done with esports athletes to see what is the impact of their sleep quality and their diet quality on their cognitive performance, and they use Neurotracker as a measure of high levels of integrated cognitive performance. There are esports studies that have justified that. And again, in esports, we can tell the difference between elite and casual sort of players. But in that study, it was interesting because with the athletes, the cyber athletes that didn't have sufficient protein in their diet, they were different from all the other athletes, as in their scores were lower at the beginning, their learning curve was much flatter, which then correlated from the research perspective that actually not having sufficient protein in your diet can reduce your brain plasticity. In the case of esports athletes, they train, 12 to 14 hours a day. It's very, very intensive. But if they're not having the correct diet, their brain's not learning from it, they're not actually going to improve as efficiently. They're going to be much less efficient in improving. So just having this single measure to look at the diet, look at sleep quality, and then see how it's impacting your performance, it can give you critical information how to take the right path to build your performance holistically, if you like. And that's where it's interesting. So other studies to show, if you have eggs in your diet, your scores will be higher on Neurotracker than if somebody who doesn't have eggs in your diet. Then there's several studies on hydration modalities. What's the best way? Electrolytes, just water, frequency. Neurotracker becomes a sensitive tool to say, okay, you get better cognitive performance when you have electrolytes at this regular frequency. So there's lots of different ways to use it to sort of probe how the brain responds to different environments, different interventions, so you can assess the efficacy of your overall performance approach. So that's where it's a kind of a deeply interesting tool, actually.
Mr. Lee, actually, we just finished talking about almost that there are some cognitive perceptual skills or parameters, factors which are really important for the sport. And there are likely chances though these parameters or these cognitive perceptual skills may have some genetic basis as well. and when there's some genetic basis of it, those who strongly possess these characteristics, they train with the system like Neurotracker, they may reach that hyperplasticity or neuroplasticity much faster than the others if their achievement motivation is at right place. My next question is now coming on to this, very unique way of training these cognitive perceptual skills. Traditionally we have seen there is some computer based or monitor screen where you see, where you have to perform some tasks. Then there are, big, nowadays, we have seen the screens, big screens, like big LED monitors, and those are touch responsive screens, and then you train. And then
Yeah.
the one thing which you sharing, while having a screen in front of you, you can put a 3D glasses and you see that screen in a 3D format. Nowadays there are some, we all know, these headgears, which we call the virtual reality headset, or
Yeah.
nowadays there are new terminologies which I have recently heard called extended reality, and augmented reality is not that new, but extended reality. So can you please throw some light on the use or integration of the virtual reality or augmented reality, extended reality, all these different type of new innovations into, neurotechnologies basically, and how basically, uh, you know uh, like whatever products nowadays, you are the one who is basically director at concept applications, so might be considering, having these very fancy virtual reality headgears. So what do you basically
Yeah.
think about it, if you can throw some light and
Yeah,
tell
it's a
us
good question.
audience?
It's an interesting area. So, I mean, years ago, I would have said, yes, VR is excellent. That's the way to go. But still today, it's still very, and I followed it for a long time, actually, because we integrate with our product. But it's still quite young at the moment. And there's a real simple, you won't get many people who will tell you this. There's a real simple, when it comes to training human performance, there's a real simple answer why. And that's because when you simulate reality in terms of how the brain perceives reality, if you don't get it right exactly, you can produce what are termed as false learning effects. So let's say you play cricket and you simulate, doing cricket in VR. If something's slightly off, the speed of the ball, the environment, or the way the brain processes it, you're actually training the brain to recognize reality in a different way that can be incorrect or counterproductive to the real world. So it's one of the reasons. So actually, we early on sort of in Neurotracker designed to using the Kinect. It was the world's first application where we actually had a 3D, immersive 3D projector, and then we actually tracked people's bodies, and then we through 3D elements. And for example, we had a goalkeeper training application that I developed where a soccer ball would come out while you do a Neurotracker, a 3D soccer ball, and you could perceive it in 3D space. And if you put your hand out to save it, if it was accurate, then the ball would bounce back and make a noise, and you can almost feel like you touched it. And that seemed to be great at first. It's like, wow, we've got commercial technology from, Xbox, and anybody can buy it. We combined it with, so high fidelity 3D, so we're using a real environment with real processing, and everything looked really good. But the more we tested it, and I worked with the professor who invented Neurotracker, the more we kind of concluded it's just too complicated because things are slightly off. There's a bit of latency, there's a bit of the way the perspective is moving when you move around, things like that. You're just at risk of producing these false learning effects, which could be quite harmful in terms of what you really want to train. So, I mean, the best go-to ultimately is the real world thing that you want to do is doing more of that. That's often not practical, and sometimes more efficient methodologies using isolation, overload, and progressive sort of training. So what we do is we keep it very simple and minimal, so we reduce interference. We do have dual tasks where we put, say, video scenes, like for the military or sports performance, or complex scenes, and decision-making, going on go. We have lots of different variations in the software, but we keep the sort of simulation side very sort of close to reality, or very, very simple. As soon as you step beyond it, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. Great for entertainment, no problem there. But when it comes to high human performance, you've got to be very careful of its designed to be very, very close, or as close as possible to the actual, real world performance you're trying to track.
Yeah.
That said, now, only this year, actually, because I've been following for the last 5 or 6 years, we're starting to get the first augmented reality devices. Now, these are a great solution. because you can mix the real world with the virtual. So you can reduce the amount of noise. You can take the elements you want to train, the complex elements you want to train, but do them with real world stimulations. For example, some of our clients are using Rocket Max AR glasses. So look at their sunglasses. They produce like the equivalent. It feels like a 4K home cinema screen. It's in true 3D, which is excellent. They're very lightweight. You can read from a phone, and then they do the Neurotracker exercise, but you have the option to see through the glasses as well. And because Neurotracker is black, we get nice, crisp, clear yellow spheres moving around in a real world environment. So if you wanted to, have a phone in your pocket, put the glasses on, you wanted to do soccer passing drills while doing Neurotracker at the same time, you could be trying to do Neurotracker multiple object tracking and do the soccer drills. These, I think, are going to be really, really useful. They're only just coming about, but I think the practical applications will be far, far easier in doing fully simulating, virtual reality. At the same time, some of, all the headsets now, they've changed the tracking system. So the headsets have to know where they are in 3D space. You used to use cameras in the room, so you have to set up the room, but now all of them have video cameras inside that track the outside room to determine its position. Those cameras can be turned into be able to see the outside world, but through digital vision. And that actually works very well. So it used to just be grayscale, but now they're actually doing full color vision because companies like, Oculus or the Meta Quest, they're actually realizing that actually by using the digital augmented version of reality, you can still do some really powerful stuff. So yeah, so from now on, I expect these devices to become more and more practical for the first time. I think for the last 10 years or so, VR has been around for maybe 20 years. I mean, I started working with the company 15 years ago, and it was about $3 million to build a virtual reality cave then, to actually get a full virtual reality. So it's not new, but only now I'm bringing the augmented reality, and the device getting more sophisticated and cheaper. And we have other sensors, headsets are bringing in EEG measurements, so able to modulate. You have foveal rendering, so they actually, it can use eye tracking, detect where you're looking, so that you don't have to use graphics processing for the rest of the scene, just the 3D degrees that I mentioned before that you're looking at, they just render that bit and you perceive everything to be high resolution. So they're only going to get more sophisticated, they're only get more integrated with lots of other neurotechnologies. And for the first time, when we mix it with true reality and virtual, that's the real power we need for developing expert performance. Then we'll have much more control and much less risk of noise and polluting the training effect rather than enhancing it.
My last question is with you, to you, sorry. If somebody want to really establish Neurotech lab at this moment, and how much it will cost?
A Neurotech lab for research or training?
Both, for research and training. Both.
Research, very, very expensive, generally just complicated anyway. And just to publish papers these days, it's a long and expensive process. Ethic reviews can take 6 months just to even, get funding for a study. So that side, I wouldn't recommend jumping into. You have to join a lab that's already established and then become successful, get your PhD, write thanks papers, and then think about starting your own lab because you'll need the funding. But in terms of a lot of our clients, in fact, quite a few of our clients have started their business just because they got Neurotracker. They got excited about it, understood it, tried it out, got interested. Like, right, I'm going to start a business around it. And they've been very successful. One of them has like 4 performance centers in Quebec at the moment. So that's actually quite feasible. So, a lot of the technologies, when you go to the website, you won't see the prices. You have to have a call and it'll often be way more expensive than you think. But then you can get off the shelf stuff, like you've got a range of devices. So, NeuroStim devices, things like that. They're quite low cost, yet they can be quite powerful. And really the synergy is combining different modalities. So if you do some neurostimulation, have neurofeedback to see what is the optimal way to use it, what are the benefits you're getting as an improvement over time, and bring in some cognitive training tools, bring in some integration of motor skills and fitness. And I think those tools are fairly low cost, but it depends on the individual tool you select. So, if you have to kind of, some of them could be like 50,000, US dollars for something that's actually a fairly simple software. It just varies, and some of them you get really sophisticated hardware. It's phenomenal stuff, and it's dirt cheap, So you kind of have to pick and choose. But I would say at the moment it's a very, very good time to start using the high technology stuff. So things like the Quest 3, phenomenally powerful device, sophisticated sensors. That would have been $500,000 maybe 5 years ago, and still wouldn't have been as good. It's tremendously powerful, and those are going to keep accelerating, progressing quickly. The software application is still young, but they're going to blossom and grow. So I think it's a really good opportunity for anybody in athletic trainers, sport performance, high performers to start. You do need to get to learn the tools and understand them, and then you need some expertise and experimentation to actually see how they synergize, how they work together. So for a lot of our clients, Neurotracker is kind of like the central hub on the wheel. They have all these different things they'll do, but Neurotracker gives them the heartbeat, whether something's being effective, whether it's not, and then they use that as the core training. So also we can use Neurotracker to increase neuroplasticity to get more benefit from the other training modalities. But yeah, when you bring a bunch of tools together, so all our most successful clients use a variety of tools, and Neurotracker is one of them. It's a compendium, and they have some phenomenal results. You can get some really impressive results, which you couldn't do 10 years ago. You just wouldn't have the tools.
Can we say, okay, someone who spend one kind of $100,000 at the moment, ready to spend $100,000 is good to go with
Not really a finance guy, but over $100,000, and I would take a shot at setting up a performance training lab. I'd be in a pretty good position. I think it'd be quite doable.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, you can you give some conclusive remarks in the last of this podcast? Can we conclude it like the all these technologies with the new addition of MR, mixed reality, virtual reality, all these technologies are still in a experimental mode rather than established one. So there are a lot of experiment going on with all these technologies. Some part of it is still ready to commercialize. You people might be dispatching the products to the sports organizations, and definitely the next step, your secondary focus is always on collecting data for research purposes and see how these technologies are working around in terms of the overall human performance enhancement. Whichever sector. So space is one, but I work in sports, so I'll talk about sports. So can we conclude it like this? Yes or no?
Yeah. So I think it's promising at the moment. I guess the key thing is institutions are slow to change, and sports industry is definitely one of them. I've worked in that area. So for example, strength and conditioning, that took 10 years to come in. It was rejected in UK football, for example, because everybody thought if you did weights, it made you stiff and it ruined your skills. It took 10 years, and now it's standard for all football teams, all sports teams around the world, do strength and conditioning, physical fitness. The next phase was sports science, methodologies, using intelligence approaches, measuring physiology, taking just a more scientific approach in general. That was kind of rejected. That took about 10 years. Now every professional sports team has sports scientists as a given. Now we're sort of moving into sort of a bit more like the neurotech and the cognitive performance domain. Underneath the skin, everybody really knows it. The brain controls the whole body, the central nervous system regulates everything, but it's a complex beast to deal with. But now we've got the new technologies that can actually do some meaningful things in terms of stimulating and enhancing brain function. The research has started and it's growing. Neurotrackers, I think, is a really promising sign because we've never funded or done any research yet. The research itself has just started off in Montreal. It's grown, exploded around the world. It's been growing exponentially. So I struggle to keep up with the number of studies that are coming out. I just get them in the box. So that's a very good sign. However, you still need to make a qualified judgment of the efficacy of new techniques. So could be a new electrical stimulation device. Does it really work? I'm not sure. And the sort of litmus test for that is whatever it measures, does it really differentiate one person to another? So you have an elite athlete and a non-athlete. Can it tell the difference between them? If it can, then it's probably going to be difficult for that tool to have a measurable impact on changing somebody's performance. So that's sort of the starting point where you're at. And I think a lot of tools at the moment are kind of getting the feeling the ground for getting that starting point to say they have something relevant and something meaningful that can actually measure something significant. And then when you can measure it and you show the difference, then you can start using it, applying a train, see if it fits that. The research side is always going to be slow. I mean, there's been studies on Neurotracker that have taken 5 years to get published. So it's a long, slow and expensive process. And even sometimes getting the funding for studies is a complicated process. In fact, we just went through assisting a group getting funding for a concussion study in Canada, which is going to be like $3 million study, a really big frontier study using Neurotracker and neurobiology and neuroimaging techniques. And it was a very, very complex process, and it'll take 3 years to complete the study, and then probably another year before everything's fully published. So yeah, don't expect a new technology to have the scientific evidence unless they've been working behind the scenes, have something really big. They'll be sitting on it, but most companies, they go to the market first, try to pretend they got some evidence and then hopefully get evidence along the way. If they're successful, you just have to wait and see. So I'll guarantee you that 90% of neurotech out on the market, and it won't be here in 5 to 10 years. 90% will go, but 10% will be very good and they'll stay, and it'll evolve from there. Yeah.
Firstly, thank you very much. I think this is the first such podcast I have shot in past 6 months, where we have just extended the time. Uh, we have taken more than 1 hour to almost around 1 hour to finish this podcast. I hope my audience, our audience, basically, this is for the sports enthusiasts, sports psychologists, those who are interested in sciences and learn about it. Um, so once again, thank you so much. And I request everyone, if you like this podcast and if you really think it adds some value to whatever you do, support us, like our video on YouTube, subscribe our channel, and share these
Yeah.
videos among others as well. Uh, I have people around, and those like Mr. Lee is the one actually we'll keep on bothering him in future as well, as soon as we'll progress in sports with the furthermore new innovations. For now, I think it's time to say bye to everyone. Once again, thank you, Mr. Lee. Hopefully we'll see you soon again. Thanks so much.
Been a pleasure. Thanks.